I got to go to a preview screening of the new Superman movie on Friday night, so I thought, given that the review embargo has now been lifted, I would give you my spoiler-free thoughts on various aspects of the film. The good and the flaws in it, because I don't think it's a perfect film. It does have some flaws, but we'll get into that. Is it bad form that I am sat next to a Batman figure and not a Superman one? I couldn't find a Superman one in the house. I know my son has them somewhere, I just couldn't find them. I am, however, wearing a Superman t-shirt. Does that make up for it? Anyway, let's get on with the review. Welcome to Culture Filter, I am Phil, and this is the channel where I like to talk about all the geeky pop culture I like. That usually is a lot of Doctor Who, but I do also talk about superhero stuff as well, like the MCU and now the DCU. So let's talk about this movie. To give you my overall broad thoughts of this, I enjoyed this movie a fair amount, I would say. I came out of it having had a good time. However, there were some aspects of it that it wasn't a perfect movie. There were some things I came out of and thought, it's a shame about that, or this could have been improved, or I will get to the negative points, but I do want to start with some of the good points, because there was a lot of good in there as well. And the biggest good of this film is absolutely the casting. This cast it's just perfectly cast. I cannot think of a single role where they have miscast in this. And right at the top of that is not Superman, although he's good. I'd say it's Lex Luthor. Nicholas Hoult as Lex Luthor, I would go as far as to say, is the best portrayal of Lex Luthor we have had in a movie. Not live action on screen, because I do think there are better interpretations on the small screen. Smallville comes to mind particularly, but also more recently in Superman and Lois. It's a very different take, but it's an interesting one in Superman and Lois as well. And I don't know if this quite beats that, but it absolutely beats any on-screen, big screen version of Lex that I have seen. Gene Hackman was always a bit too kind of comedic for me. Kevin Spacey was kind of riffing off that, maybe made it a little bit darker, but overall he was still that kind of bumbling, slightly, he was basing it off of that. Then you've got Jesse Eisenberg, who, well, I don't know what was going on there, but it didn't seem like Lex to me. Whereas this has the kind of, it feels like the most comic accurate maybe we've got. He has the business aspect. He is a businessman. He presents as a businessman, and he has that kind of scheming, that intelligence. I think absolutely this is the version of Lex on screen that has gone the most. It doesn't mean that he doesn't sometimes overplay it a little bit, but I thought it was the standout performance of the film. But that's no shade on anybody else, because everyone else was good. Rachel, I'm having to look because I can't remember what her last name is. Rachel Brosnahan, I think that's how you pronounce it, who played Lois. She was really good as well. She's definitely up there with my favourite Loises. She's not right at the top. Again, she's probably not right at the top. And again, it tends to be the TV ones that kind of trump her. But I did think she did a brilliant job. She kind of had that kind of feisty energy of Margot Kidder. And she has that kind of like, there was one scene where she's interviewing Clark and as Superman, and you get a real sense of that journalistic flair that the character has, that wins her Pulitzer prizes, have you pronounced that, and things, and that was absolutely there, and I believed her as a fierce journalist in this, definitely. She gets a little less to do towards the back end of the film, and she kind of gets sidelined a little bit there, but in that first half, she's a really well-rounded character that I think the actress does a brilliant job, and she's well-written as well. David Corenswet as Clark has that kind of perfect level of goofiness as Clark that you kind of want from the character, but without being over the top with it. Like, as much as I love Christopher Reeves's portrayal, his Clark was very much deliberately an over the top bumbling buffoon. he kind of, David Corenswet dials it back. He's still got that kind of slightly goofy nature, but it kind of feels more real with him. And when he's Superman as well, those elements of Clark's character come out. Because remember, I mean, certainly in most of the iterations we've got, both in comics and stuff in the modern era, Clark isn't the disguise. Superman is the disguise. Clark, he grew up as Clark Kent. That is who he is. His personality is Clark Kent. And it makes sense that that would come out as Superman as well. So his little funny asides and things that he does in this movie work really well to humanize him while he's being Superman as well, rather than always being kind of like this stoic, brooding person, which we had in the last iteration, which I didn't hate. I didn't hate the Snyder films. I quite liked Man of Steel, but it's not my favourite version of Superman. I prefer Superman to be that kind of slightly more upbeat and positive looking character. And this Superman and Clark is that. He is sweet, he is kind, he's always looking for the right things to do. And he'll protect those that are both important to him personally, but also just, random innocents standing by. He'll go out of his way to make sure people don't get needlessly hurt. And that, I think, is very important to show Superman doing, because that is kind of core to his character and always has been. He is the type of person that will go and save a cat from a tree on his way to defeating the big monster. That's the kind of character Superman is, and that's the kind of character we get in this film. And that's in his portrayal. It's also in the way the character is written. There is one moment where, for instance, he'll always look for the kindest approach to anything to do. And without going into spoilers and details, there is one moment in this film where he has a disagreement with Green Lantern, with Guy Gardner, about the actions they should take, and ultimately he acknowledges that the end result might be the same, but that there's a kinder way of doing it. And so he acknowledges that certain actions might need to be taken, but he will always look for the kindest, most humane way of doing something. So I think all credit to James Gunn here. He has captured that true essence of what Superman is from the comics, from most previous iterations of the character, and really written that into the script. And like I said, there isn't a character that is miscast in this. I think everybody does a fantastic job with what they're given. I would say some of them are underused to some degree. Some, what looks like they would be absolutely performances, and they knock it out of the park for the lines they've got, aren't given much to do. I will come to that in a minute. In terms of the plot, I enjoyed the plot. I think it was probably the most comic book plot that we've ever had in a superhero movie. It felt like it was lifted from the pages of the comics. In one sense, that is fantastic, because we're getting that kind of, we're getting a for the first time possibly, a Superman that feels like he's been lifted directly out of the comics. There are some negative sides of that in the sense of how much happens, and I'll talk about that in a minute when I get onto the flaws of the film. But overall, I enjoyed the plot. I think dealing with Superman's sort of presence on a world stage and what he does choose or does not choose to get involved in, that's an interesting thing to cover, and they cover that in an interesting way here, I think. With some, interesting parallels with potentially stuff that's going on in the world right now. Like, if Superman was here, would he let that happen? It's interesting to grapple with, I think. I think it's an interesting plot. So the whole movie feels very comic book in both its tone and its scale and everything going on. James Gunn in interviews has said that he doesn't feel we need to see the origin story of Superman again, along with we don't need to see the origin of Spider-Man again, for instance. And I completely agree with that. I think, we've had almost 40 years of Superman on the big screen now, and even before that, he was quite a prevalent thing in pop culture. General audiences know the basics of Superman's origin. They know he came on a rocket from Krypton, his planet's been destroyed, his parents sent him in this rocket, and he was raised by farmers in Kansas. You don't really need to know much more than that. That's the basics of his story, and you don't need to retell that over again. We've seen it so many times. I think it's perfectly fine and makes sense to miss it here. This isn't some B-list character. This is Superman, and kind of everybody, through general pop culture osmosis, knows his origin already. You don't need to show it every single time you reboot a series. So being thrown into a world where he's already an established superhero, there are already other established superheroes even, that kind of works for this, I think. And that was, it was a risk going in, I think, because that was one of the criticisms of Batman v Superman, that they did too much setup for future movies in it by cramming too many other, Justice League type things in there. But I don't necessarily think that's what they're doing here. The inclusion of other superheroes and metahumans into this world feels like it's world building, feels like it's natural world building rather than, hey, here's something we're hinting at coming later. All of these characters feel like they belong there and they are part of this story rather than being chucked in just to say, hey, look, there's one or two exceptions, but they are fleeting cameos. But the ones that have a big presence are there for a reason to this plot, and that makes sense. And I think they're introduced in a way that gives the audience any information they need about them. They're not going to be overly confused if you have never heard of a Green Lantern before, or you've never heard of Hawk Girl before. What you need to know is in this movie, so it's not confusing in that sense. But it does bring me on to my first negative, because that it is linked. And that's that even though all of these elements, when you take them as individual things and you look at them, they work with the plot, they make sense in this movie, there is a lot of them. And they feel really crammed in. And it affects the pace of the movie, I think. Like, for an hour and a half from when the movie starts, the pace is all go, 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 action, 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 and there's barely any respite. Even those moments where the characters do stop and have a conversation, it kind of feels hurried. It kind of feels like they're rushing to get to the next action piece, and that goes on for an hour and a half of the movie, and they're constantly introducing new things, and it's all a bit of a sensory overload, frankly. So I have no problem with the Justice Gang, with Guy Gardner, with I think they all work in this film, but along with all the other elements, all of the various bad guys they've got in this element, all the various monsters he fights, there's just so much. And in one sense that works because it establishes this world where all of this stuff is a regular occurrence, and that's kind of world building. But in another sense, it is really exhausting to watch. So while no element feels by itself out of place, I think they could have, maybe if they'd lessened the amount of elements, it would have given the story more room to breathe, the characters more room to breathe, and to get a bit more character development out of people, and more room for those characters that, only got a few lines, but actually that the actors seem to do it really well. Maybe we could have expanded those a little bit, like Perry White, the traditional Superman characters might have got a bit more to do if we hadn't overstuffed it. The fight scenes too, while a technical feat, and they do look impressive, also very chaotic in the sense, that's kind of what they're going for, I guess, but it's very hard to follow the fights, and that's not just a criticism of this film, this is a criticism of most modern films that have high-paced action scenes with CGI, is it's sometimes very hard to follow what's going on, and you kind of want a bit more, hey, let's get the bigger picture of this fight and see what's going on without all these close-ups and zooming around with the camera so much. I like pace in fight scenes, but you kind of got to be able to see what's going on as well, and along with most modern superhero films, that is an issue for this film. I mean, it depends on what your tastes are. Maybe you like this, but I always struggle a little bit to follow what's going on with the fight. I'd like to see a bit more of the fight choreography. So it was a relief when about an hour and a half in, we kind of slowed down the pace a little bit, finally, and we had a nice scene on the Kent farm with his parents, and that was very much needed, and it ramped back up again after that scene, but I'm very glad that scene was there. I just kind of wish we'd had a few more scenes like that. In a sense, the interview scene was a bit like that, but even that was kind of frenetically paced with the cutting. It kind of felt like it was on a steamroller out of there. Let's talk about his parents, because I have mixed feelings about the Kents in this film. When they were first shown on screen, it was as part of a telephone conversation, and the way they were portrayed is in a way that I've not seen them portrayed before. In a kind of, I don't know how to, sort of stereotypical country bumpkin type way, where they struggle with technology and they don't, their son's gone off to this modern world and they don't, really understand it, but they want to check he's okay. And it's kind of, I wasn't keen on it when they first started it. I was worried that they were going to be played as comedic characters throughout the film. Now, luckily, after that scene, they get a bit more development the dad does more than the mum. But so Jonathan Kent gets a bit more development when we get to this slowed down scene on the farm. And there is actually a really nice scene between the two of them as they discuss what's going on that ties into the sort of theme, one of the themes of the movie, which is sort of parental expectations and parental feelings towards offspring and, your children. That's one thing that plays into Clark's, particularly Superman's, character development throughout the film, his arc throughout the film, that plays into that. And that scene, that was a really touching scene that kind of worked, and it came at the right moment to slow the pace down a bit as well. Now, I mentioned wasted characters earlier on. We get various sort of Daily Planet people pop up in this. You get Perry White, you get Jimmy Olsen. Jimmy, out of, apart from Lois and Clark, probably gets the most to do out of the Daily Planet gang. You got Cat Grant, you've got some random sports reporter. I don't know if he's a comic book character or not. I didn't recognise the name. I'd say the biggest waste of those is Perry White. Wendell Pierce is a great actor, and from what he does deliver in this film, he seems perfect for Perry White, but we don't really see much of him and he doesn't really get to do much, so hopefully in future films we'll get to see a bit more from him. Now, I did say in my positives that everything in this film is kind of set up, even all those comic book elements like the Green Lantern and stuff like that is set up and introduced in a way that I think will be accessible to new viewers, but I am coming at that from a inside perspective. I am somebody who has read the comic books. I know who Green Lantern is. I know who Mr. Terrific is. So I don't, I'm not someone who can look at it and go, oh, this is definitely accessible for new people, because I'm not one of those new people. But I think all the information is there in the movie that you would need to not go, who are these people? Why? I'm confused. I think most of them make sense. Maybe the reference to the Green Lantern Corps might be the one exception to that, but for the most part, I think it works. But this is still very much a film that feels like it's aimed at, Superman / DC Comics fans. Fans of the characters and the universe as a whole already. It does very much feel like it's aimed at those, to me specifically, which maybe is why I like it. I don't know how people are going to feel about it if they're much more of a casual person, if they've only seen Superman films, if they've not even checked out any other DC, maybe they never watched Wonder Woman, maybe they never watched Green Lantern film, they have just watched Superman films and Batman films. What are they going to think of this? I hope they find it accessible, because I think it probably is, but it doesn't feel like it's aimed at them, and that is possibly gonna be a negative for it. It's not a negative for me personally watching it, but we'll see what it does to it overall. So there you go. There are my spoiler-free thoughts. Kind of rambled on a bit longer than I thought I would there. But what do you think once you've seen it? Let me know. What are your expectations for it if you haven't seen it yet and are planning on going to see it? Are you excited? Are you worried about certain elements? Is anything I've said helped or hindered that made you more worried? Let me know in the comments below. Also, let me know if you'd like me to do more Superman content while I'm here. I was thinking about maybe doing a video on ranking the live action Supermans now I've seen the latest one. Would you like that? Let me know in the comments below. Or I did have another video idea about red trunks versus not red trunks on the suit. Maybe I'll do that. Let me know. See you soon. Bye.